In the heart of the American Midwest, tucked away amidst towering oak trees and meandering rivers, lay the peaceful town of Willow Creek. Its cobblestone streets, friendly residents, and quiet atmosphere made it the kind of place people dreamed of settling in. But on one fateful summer evening, Willow Creek's tranquility would be shattered forever. The evening began like any other. It was a warm July night, and the sun had just dipped behind the horizon, casting a soft, golden glow over the town. Inside the small coffee shop at the town's center, a group of locals gathered, exchanging pleasantries, sipping lattes, and discussing the mundane details of their daily lives. Among them was 34-year-old Rachel Miller, a beloved local teacher with a reputation for kindness and a passion for helping her students. Rachel, who had taught in Willow Creek for nearly a decade, was known for her warmth and dedication. She had just finished a long day at school and was looking forward to the weekend. But that evening, Rachel would never make it home. At 7:45 p.m., Rachel placed her empty coffee cup on the counter and said her goodbyes. She had plans to meet a few friends for dinner at a nearby restaurant, a casual gathering that had been in the works for weeks. She stepped outside the coffee shop, glancing around at the picturesque streets of Willow Creek. Everything seemed normal, almost idyllic. However, the calmness of the night was about to be ripped apart. As Rachel walked down the street, she pulled out her phone to send a quick message to her best friend, Jenny. "Running a little late, but on my way," she typed, hitting send before tucking the phone back into her bag. She didn't notice the figure lurking in the shadows just a few steps behind her. By the time Rachel had reached the alleyway near her home, a man had emerged from the dark and approached her. A struggle ensued. There were no witnesses to the attack, only the faintest sounds of muffled screams that faded into the night. Rachel's phone, found later near the entrance to the alley, indicated that she had tried to call 911 just moments before her attacker silenced her voice forever. The authorities would later find the scene gruesome. Rachel Miller was dead, her body left discarded like refuse, hidden away in a secluded part of Willow Creek, a place where everyone thought they were safe. The news of Rachel's murder spread like wildfire through the small town. At first, people couldn't believe it. Murders didn't happen in Willow Creek. It wasn't that kind of place. But as the reality set in, fear and suspicion gripped the community. How could something so horrific happen in their quiet town? Detective James Harper, a seasoned investigator with the Willow Creek Police Department, was called to the scene. Harper, who had been with the department for over 15 years, had seen his fair share of crime, but nothing prepared him for the brutality of Rachel's murder. The scene was harrowing. Rachel's body was found in an abandoned alley, bruised and beaten. But the most chilling detail was a single message scrawled on the wall above her. "The price for silence is death." The message, written in blood, was the first clue that this might not be a random act of violence. Harper knew immediately that they were dealing with something far darker than a simple robbery gone wrong. There was intent, a motive that was still unknown. The town's residents, rattled by the gruesome crime, immediately began to speculate. Who could have done this? Was it someone they knew? As Harper dug deeper into Rachel's life, he began uncovering unsettling details. On the surface, Rachel appeared to be the picture of a perfect small-town teacher. Beloved by her students, adored by her friends, and with a reputation for being a caring mentor. But as Harper began to talk to those who knew her best, he learned that Rachel had a secret that she had kept hidden for years. A few months before her death, Rachel had started an affair with a local man named Scott Andrews, a married man with children. Scott was well known in the community as a charming and successful businessman. His reputation was spotless, but behind closed doors, his marriage had been in turmoil. Scott had been fighting with his wife for months, and the affair with Rachel was his escape. Scott's wife, Lisa Andrews, had found out about the affair just days before Rachel's murder. According to friends and neighbors, Lisa was devastated and furious. She had confronted Rachel several times, demanding that she end things with Scott. Was it possible that Lisa had taken matters into her own hands? Had the murder been an act of jealousy, a desperate attempt to stop an affair that threatened to tear apart her family? Detective Harper's suspicions began to grow. But as he started to follow the trail of evidence pointing toward Lisa, another shocking development occurred. As Detective Harper continued to dig into Rachel's affair with Scott, new revelations came to light. It wasn't just Lisa Andrews who had a motive for murder. Rachel had also been involved with several other people in town, and the more Harper investigated, the more tangled the web of lies became. One of the most shocking pieces of information Harper uncovered was the fact that Rachel had been having a second, more secretive affair with a local police officer, Mark Donovan. Donovan had been working with the department for over 10 years, known for his clean record and dedication to his job. But Harper's digging revealed something that no one in town could have expected. Rachel and Mark had been meeting in secret for months, and their relationship was far from innocent. In fact, their connection ran deep, so deep that Rachel had reportedly made plans to leave Willow Creek for a new life with Mark. She had even made arrangements for a fresh start in a nearby city, away from the prying eyes of the town. But could the pressure of living a double life have led Mark to lash out in a fit of rage? Harper's investigation uncovered text messages between Rachel and Mark, including some that were less than friendly. Rachel had, at times, threatened to expose their affair to the public, which could have jeopardized Mark's career and reputation. Did Rachel's decision to go public with their secret lead Mark to take drastic action? Mark Donovan became a prime suspect. As Harper interviewed those closest to him, he learned that Donovan had been unusually distant in the days leading up to Rachel's death. In fact, he had called in sick to work the day after Rachel was murdered, which was highly uncharacteristic for him. But while Harper focused on Scott and Mark, he began to feel the walls closing in on another person entirely, someone who had been hiding in plain sight. Willow Creek, for all its beauty, had a dark side that many of its residents preferred to ignore. Beneath the charming facade of the town lay a history of secrets, lies, and unresolved mysteries that had festered for years. It was only when Rachel Miller's murder forced the townspeople to confront their past that these secrets began to surface. Rachel's death had unearthed something that had been buried for decades, a history of violence and deceit. As Harper looked deeper into the town's past, he discovered that Willow Creek had experienced several unresolved missing persons cases in the past 20 years. Each one of these cases had been marked as unsolved, dismissed by the local authorities as simple disappearances or misunderstandings. One name that kept coming up in Harper's investigation was that of Peter Lawrence, a man who had vanished under suspicious circumstances 15 years earlier. Peter was a young man who had once been a close friend of Rachel's. In fact, Rachel had been one of the last people to see him before he disappeared without a trace. Peter had been a troubled soul, battling addiction and mental health issues, but those who knew him remembered him as kind-hearted, though prone to bouts of anger and paranoia. Harper's research revealed that Peter had been involved in a confrontation with someone in town just days before his disappearance. His name was Tommy Hayes, a wealthy landowner who had been known for his volatile temper. Tommy had always denied any involvement in Peter's disappearance, but Harper couldn't ignore the growing evidence linking the two men. Could Peter's disappearance have been the result of a violent altercation that went horribly wrong? Had Tommy Hayes played a role in silencing Peter, and was Rachel somehow involved in the cover-up? The more Harper uncovered, the more he realized that Rachel's murder was only the latest in a series of dark and deadly events that had plagued Willow Creek for years. As Harper's investigation deepened, he began to piece together a chilling portrait of what had really happened on the night of Rachel's death. The web of lies was more complex than anyone could have imagined, and the connections between the people involved became increasingly sinister. The breakthrough came when Harper received a tip-off from an unexpected source: Rachel's former student, Kyle Bennett. Kyle, now 22, had recently returned to Willow Creek after several years of living out of state. He had been one of Rachel's favorite students and had always admired her for her kindness and dedication. But when Harper interviewed him, he learned something that changed everything. Kyle revealed that, before Rachel's affair with Scott and Mark, she had been involved with Tommy Hayes. The two had been in a brief but intense relationship when Rachel was in her early 20s, and their connection had been marked by possessiveness, control, and violence. Kyle told Harper that Rachel had confided in him about the relationship, explaining how Tommy had once hit her during a heated argument. As Rachel had grown older, she had distanced herself from Tommy, but their past had never truly been left behind. Tommy had never gotten over Rachel, and his obsession with her had continued long after their breakup. Was it possible that Tommy had finally snapped, unable to accept that Rachel had moved on with other men? Harper knew he was getting closer to the truth, but there was still one last piece of the puzzle that needed to fall into place. With the evidence pointing increasingly toward Tommy Hayes, Detective Harper made the decision to confront him directly. Tommy had lived a life of privilege and influence in Willow Creek, and many people in town were afraid to speak out against him. But Harper wasn't afraid. He knew that bringing Tommy to justice could finally bring peace to Rachel's grieving family and help put an end to the horrors that had haunted this town for far too long. On a cold December afternoon, Harper and his team arrived at Tommy's sprawling estate on the outskirts of town. Tommy greeted them at the door, his usual confident demeanor replaced by a nervous, almost defensive energy. When Harper informed him that he was being arrested in connection with Rachel Miller's murder, Tommy's face went pale. He tried to remain calm, but the cracks were beginning to show. In the interrogation room, Harper laid out the evidence against Tommy: his violent history, his obsession with Rachel, and the damning testimony from Kyle Bennett. Tommy initially denied any involvement in Rachel's death, insisting that he had no reason to harm her. But as the hours wore on, the pressure began to mount. Harper's questions became more pointed, and Tommy's answers grew more desperate. Finally, Tommy broke down. "Yes, I did it," he confessed, his voice trembling. "I couldn't stand the thought of Rachel being with anyone else. She belonged to me. She always had, and she always would." The confession sent shockwaves through Willow Creek. Tommy Hayes, the man everyone had believed was above reproach, was the one responsible for Rachel's brutal murder. But as Harper learned in the days that followed, Tommy's confession was only the beginning of the dark truth. In the months that followed Tommy Hayes' arrest, the town of Willow Creek began to pick up the pieces of its shattered identity. The trial of Tommy Hayes was a spectacle, with the entire town watching in disbelief as one of their own was held accountable for the gruesome murder that had rocked their community. But as the details of Tommy's actions came to light, even darker truths emerged. Tommy had been responsible for far more than just Rachel's murder. His obsession with power and control had led him to commit unspeakable acts, and the true scale of his crimes sent a ripple of horror through Willow Creek that would be felt for generations. For Detective Harper, the case was one of the most difficult of his career. Not only had he uncovered the horrific details of Rachel's death, but he had also exposed the hidden underbelly of the town he had worked so hard to protect. The murder of Rachel Miller had revealed that even the most peaceful of places could harbor darkness, and that sometimes the most shocking truths are hidden in plain sight. As for Willow Creek, it would never be the same. The town, forever marked by the tragic death of one of its own, would have to rebuild piece by painful piece. But in the end, the people of Willow Creek learned that the price of silence was far too high, and that the truth, no matter how ugly, would always come to light. The trial of Tommy Hayes dragged on for weeks, with each day revealing more about the depths of his obsession with Rachel. As the prosecution built its case, Tommy's defense team tried to paint him as a man driven to madness by his past love for Rachel. They argued that the violence he had inflicted on her was the result of a toxic relationship that had spiraled out of control. But the townspeople weren't buying it. Willow Creek had always been a place where people believed in justice, and they weren't going to let a wealthy man with influence get away with murder. Tommy's testimony during the trial was chilling. He recounted his obsession with Rachel, how he had watched her every move and followed her from a distance after their breakup. He admitted to sending her cryptic messages, some of which were found in her personal items after her death. But it was his confession that sent a ripple of disgust through the courtroom. "I loved her," Tommy said, his voice trembling. "I loved her more than anyone could ever love another person. And she chose them over me. Couldn't take it. I couldn't stand seeing her with Scott, with Mark. I thought, if I could just have her back, things would be right again." As the trial reached its climax, it became clear that Tommy's obsession with control had led him to commit murder. The realization shook the town to its core. The charming, wealthy businessman they had once admired was nothing more than a cold-blooded killer. The final day of Tommy Hayes' trial arrived, and the tension in the courtroom was palpable. As the judge prepared to deliver his verdict, Harper sat in the front row, watching intently. He had dedicated months to solving Rachel's murder, and now, after all the hard work, the moment of justice was finally at hand. Tommy was found guilty of first-degree murder. The sentencing was swift. The judge, in a somber tone, sentenced Tommy to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The courtroom erupted in a mixture of relief and sadness. Willow Creek had never expected to see one of its own behind bars for such a heinous crime. But now that it was over, there was a sense of closure. But for Rachel's family, the sentence couldn't bring her back. Her parents, devastated by the loss of their daughter, quietly left the courtroom, holding each other for support. Rachel's best friend, Jenny, stood by them, fighting back tears as she remembered the vibrant, loving woman who had been taken from them far too soon. The aftermath of the trial left Willow Creek in a state of uneasy calm. The town, which had once felt like a safe haven, now seemed shadowed by the secrets that had been uncovered. Harper, while proud of solving the case, couldn't help but feel the weight of what had happened. The people he had known for years, the families, the teachers, the business owners, had all been touched by the darkness of this crime. Harper continued to visit Rachel's grave, paying his respects and reflecting on the case. It had consumed so much of his time and energy, but now that it was over, he found himself wondering if there were others like Tommy hiding in plain sight. If someone like him could go unnoticed for so long, Who else in Willow Creek was harboring their own dark secrets? One evening, as Harper walked along the quiet streets of the town, he caught sight of something that made his heart stop. A shadowy figure lurking by the cemetery gate, just outside of Rachel's grave. It was a moment that would stay with him forever. Was it possible that, even after all these years, the town's dark past still had more to reveal? With the end of Tommy Hayes' trial, the town of Willow Creek tried to return to normalcy. However, there was an undeniable sense of unease in the air. Detective Harper continued to monitor the town, now aware that there were unresolved mysteries that lingered beneath the surface. His thoughts often drifted back to the case of Peter Lawrence, the young man who had vanished years ago, whose fate was still shrouded in uncertainty. The more Harper looked into Peter's disappearance, the more he realized how many unanswered questions remained. Was there a connection between Peter's case and Rachel's murder? Were there other people in Willow Creek who had disappeared or been forgotten, their stories buried by time? Harper's determination to uncover the truth led him to an unexpected discovery. He found a series of old police reports detailing the mysterious disappearances of several young men in the town over the past 30 years. The common thread? Each one had been involved in a confrontation with someone in a position of power, whether it was Tommy Hayes, other wealthy families in town, or influential figures who had long since moved away. Harper couldn't ignore the chilling possibility that Tommy Hayes wasn't the only one hiding a dark secret. The more he uncovered, the more he became convinced that the town's history was far more sinister than anyone had realized. One of the most disturbing pieces of evidence Harper uncovered came from an old photograph, one that had been taken just days before Peter Lawrence vanished. In the photograph, Peter was seen standing alongside Tommy Hayes and several other prominent figures from Willow Creek, including Scott Andrews and Mark Donovan. The photograph was a striking piece of evidence. It wasn't just that Peter had been friends with these men. It was the way they looked at him, almost as if they were watching him, waiting for him to make a move. There was a tension in the image that Harper couldn't ignore. Had Peter known too much? Had he been silenced to protect the secrets of those who ruled Willow Creek? Harper was left with more questions than answers. The discovery of the photograph felt like a breakthrough, but it only deepened the mystery. The more he dug into the town's history, the more Harper realized that the truth about Rachel Miller's murder was far more complex than anyone had imagined. As the months passed, Harper continued his investigation into the dark secrets of Willow Creek. But it wasn't until one late evening, when he was reviewing old case files, that the truth finally began to emerge in a way that he couldn't ignore. It was a letter, buried at the bottom of a file folder that had been left untouched for years. The letter was from Peter Lawrence, written just before his disappearance. In it, Peter confessed to knowing something about a powerful secret society that operated in Willow Creek, a group of wealthy and influential men who had controlled the town for decades. This society, Peter wrote, had used its power to cover up crimes, silence people who got too close to the truth, and ensure that their darkest secrets remained hidden. Peter had known the truth about what happened to Rachel, and he had been trying to expose it. But before he could take action, he was silenced. The letter, along with everything Harper had uncovered, finally pointed to the shocking conclusion. Tommy Hayes, Scott Andrews, and even Mark Donovan were part of this secret society, a group that had operated for decades, using violence, manipulation, and fear to protect their interests. Rachel's murder was just one piece of a much larger puzzle. The revelation about the secret society operating in Willow Creek sent shockwaves through Detective Harper's mind. It wasn't just a small-town murder. It was part of a much larger, more deeply entrenched system of power and corruption that had been in place for decades. Harper couldn't shake the thought of the letter Peter Lawrence had written. Peter had been onto something dark, something that even the people of Willow Creek couldn't comprehend. The society Peter had mentioned, made up of the town's wealthiest and most influential families, was the backbone of the town's success. They had controlled everything: the businesses, the politics, and even the local police force. What made this even more chilling was the idea that Rachel had, unknowingly, stumbled into this web of deception. She had been a target from the moment she became involved with Scott Andrews, and her murder had been the final step in silencing her. But why? Why had Rachel, of all people, become the focus of their wrath? Harper knew he had to confront the town's power players. He couldn't let the murder of Rachel Miller go unpunished, not when it was tied to something so much larger. But how could he bring down an entire network of corruption without risking his own life? With each passing day, Harper grew more certain that the power structure in Willow Creek went beyond just Tommy Hayes, Scott Andrews, and Mark Donovan. He began to question the very foundation of the town's success. The wealth and prosperity that seemed to surround Willow Creek were built on secrets and lies. It was a town built on blood. In an attempt to gain leverage, Harper reached out to several former town residents who had left years ago. Some had left because they were fed up with the corruption. Others had escaped under mysterious circumstances. The more Harper spoke to them, the clearer it became that many had known about the secret society but had been too terrified to speak out. One of the former residents, Diane Hudson, revealed a startling fact. Her father, who had been a prominent lawyer in town, had been investigating the secret society just before his untimely death. Diane believed her father had been murdered for his knowledge. They didn't want him to expose them, she said bitterly, and they didn't want anyone else finding out either. Diane's father had been close to uncovering the truth, and his death had been ruled an accident. But now, with the information she provided, Harper began to see a pattern. Several others who had come too close to the truth had either disappeared or been pushed out of Willow Creek. Harper now had the pieces of the puzzle, but he knew he couldn't take down the entire network alone. It was too powerful, too dangerous. Harper wasn't the only one who had been keeping track of the secret society. Unbeknownst to him, there was one person who had witnessed more than anyone could have imagined. A local historian named Sylvia Green had spent years researching the history of Willow Creek. She had studied its founding families, the land deals, and the early records that documented the rise of power in the town. Sylvia had quietly gathered information about the secret society, never sharing her findings with anyone for fear of retaliation. But when Rachel's murder had brought the town's dark past to light, Sylvia knew it was time to speak up. She contacted Harper in secret, inviting him to meet at her home, a modest house on the edge of town. There, she presented Harper with a collection of old documents, photos, and journals that she had pieced together over the years. The most revealing of these documents was an old map of the town, drawn by one of Willow Creek's original founders. The map revealed hidden tunnels beneath the town, tunnels that had been used by the secret society for centuries. These tunnels were used for meetings, illegal transactions, and, as Sylvia suspected, for hiding the bodies of those who had been silenced. This town was never what it seemed, Sylvia told Harper as she handed him the map. They've been hiding things for generations. And Rachel was caught in the middle of something she didn't understand. Harper felt a surge of determination. Sylvia had given him the final clue he needed, the location of the secret meetings. If he could infiltrate their next gathering, he could expose them all. Harper couldn't afford to wait for a trial to expose the secret society. He had to act quickly. Armed with Sylvia's map, he set out to investigate the hidden tunnels beneath Willow Creek. His plan was simple: find the society's meeting place and gather evidence to bring them down once and for all. Late one evening, after hours of navigating the winding tunnels beneath the town, Harper arrived at a hidden chamber deep within the earth. The air was damp and thick with the scent of mildew, and the walls were lined with faded portraits of the town's founding fathers, men who had long since passed, but whose legacies lived on through the society. Harper crept closer to the chamber's entrance, where he could hear muffled voices. He waited in the shadows, listening intently. As he peered inside, he saw a group of men and women gathered around a large oak table. At the head of the table sat Tommy Hayes, his face as cold and calculating as ever. Beside him were other familiar faces: Scott Andrews, Mark Donovan, and several other influential figures in the town. But what struck Harper most was the presence of someone he hadn't expected: Lisa Andrews, Scott's wife. She was sitting at the table, her eyes filled with cold determination. Lisa had been one of the key players all along. She had been the one to push Rachel into the corner, using her connections to control the situation. And now, here she was, plotting with the very people responsible for Rachel's death. Harper knew that this was his chance to expose them all. But as he took a step forward, a creaking sound echoed through the chamber. One of the members had spotted him. The moment Harper had feared had come. The secret society had discovered his presence in the tunnels, and they weren't about to let him escape alive. The chamber erupted into chaos as Tommy Hayes stood up, his eyes blazing with fury. "You shouldn't have come here, Harper," he snarled. "You think you can bring us down? We own this town." Scott Andrews and Mark Donovan stood, too, their faces hard with anger. But it was Lisa Andrews who surprised Harper the most. She stood up calmly, as if she had been expecting this confrontation all along. "I told you, Harper," she said coldly, her voice dripping with venom. "You should have stayed out of this. Now you're just another pawn in our game." Harper backed away, his mind racing. He was outnumbered and outmatched, but he wasn't going to back down. He had come this far, and he couldn't let them escape justice. The confrontation escalated quickly, with Harper drawing his weapon. It was a fight for survival now, a fight to ensure that the town of Willow Creek would finally learn the truth about what had been happening behind the scenes for decades. Part 21: The Reckoning. In the chaos that followed, Harper managed to escape the tunnel, but not without consequences. A bullet grazed his arm as he ran, but he didn't stop. The truth about Willow Creek's darkest secrets needed to be exposed, no matter what it cost him. With the help of Sylvia Green and several brave town residents who had finally found the courage to speak out, Harper was able to bring the society's members to justice. The trials that followed were long and grueling, but in the end, every single member of the secret society was convicted for their role in the crimes that had plagued Willow Creek for years. Tommy Hayes, Scott Andrews, Mark Donovan, Lisa Andrews, and the others were sentenced to life in prison. The town was left to rebuild piece by painful piece. But with the truth finally brought to light, Willow Creek could begin the long process of healing. In the end, Willow Creek was never the same. The once idyllic town had been torn apart by the truth of its own history. But the people, though scarred, could finally look forward to a future without the shadow of corruption hanging over them. As for Detective Harper, the case would remain with him for the rest of his life. He had uncovered secrets that no one should ever have to face. But he had also ensured that the town's darkest chapter was finally over. Willow Creek would remember Rachel Miller, not as a victim, but as the woman who had brought the truth to light and forever changed the town for the better. After the trials, Willow Creek began to heal, but some scars ran too deep. It wasn't just the residents who had suffered from the shadow cast by the secret society. It was the very fabric of the town's history that had been tarnished forever. Detective Harper couldn't shake the feeling that there were still more secrets waiting to be uncovered. It was almost as if the past had a way of repeating itself, a cycle that was bound to continue unless someone broke it. As Harper continued to sift through the records of the society's past, he uncovered unsettling details about the founding of Willow Creek itself. The town's first settlers had been a group of ambitious individuals, eager to carve out their place in the world. But along with their ambition came a ruthless drive to succeed, no matter the cost. The first members of the secret society weren't just wealthy men. They were men who were willing to do anything to secure their wealth, power, and influence. They had used threats, intimidation, and even murder to protect their interests. The same tactics had been passed down from generation to generation, ensuring that the society remained in control. Harper began to realize that the story of Rachel Miller's murder wasn't just about one woman. It was the culmination of years of manipulation and power struggles that had been brewing beneath the surface of Willow Creek for decades. Rachel had been caught in the crossfire of a battle that she never even knew existed. But the question lingered in Harper's mind. Who else in the town knew about the society's secrets, and how many more lives had been affected by their reign of terror? With his investigation into the town's history continuing to yield more disturbing information, Harper knew that the missing piece of the puzzle was closer than ever. It wasn't just about uncovering the past. It was about preventing the future from falling into the same trap. There had to be a way to break the cycle. One day, Harper received a letter from an anonymous source, someone claiming to have information that could bring down the last remnants of the secret society. The letter was cryptic, but it suggested that one final person, the true mastermind behind the society's power, was still at large and had been for years. The letter pointed Harper toward a man named Andrew Parker, a former member of the town council who had mysteriously disappeared a decade ago. Andrew had been known for his ambition, and it was rumored that he had been the one pulling the strings behind the scenes, orchestrating much of the town's darker dealings. Harper knew that he couldn't rest until he found out the truth about Andrew Parker. Was he alive? Had he been hiding in plain sight all along? The letter provided a series of clues that Harper would need to follow, each one more cryptic than the last. The investigation into Andrew Parker was Harper's final chance to bring down the last remnants of the society's grip on Willow Creek. But time was running out, and Harper could feel the pressure mounting. Days passed, and Harper found himself following leads that seemed to take him in circles. Every time he thought he was close to uncovering Andrew Parker's whereabouts, another obstacle appeared. But finally, after weeks of searching, Harper received a tip that would change everything. A local bartender, who had once worked for the town council, approached Harper in confidence. He revealed that he had seen Andrew Parker not long ago, living under an alias in a small cabin on the outskirts of Willow Creek. The bartender claimed that Parker had been involved in secret meetings with a few of the remaining society members, but had grown paranoid and reclusive as time went on. Harper immediately set out to locate the cabin, his heart racing with anticipation. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for. As he approached the cabin, he could feel the weight of the years pressing down on him. The society's power had been built on lies, but now, With the truth finally within reach, Harper knew that he couldn't stop until Andrew Parker was brought to justice. Harper stood in front of the cabin, his hand gripping the door handle. Inside, he knew, was the man who had helped create the web of corruption that had ensnared Willow Creek. Andrew Parker was the missing link, the one who had orchestrated much of the society's darkest dealings. Harper opened the door cautiously, the old wood creaking as it gave way. Inside, the cabin was dimly lit, and the air was thick with dust. There was no sign of a struggle, no indication that anyone had been living here for years. But Harper could feel the presence of something sinister that had been lurking in the shadows. As he made his way further into the cabin, Harper spotted a figure sitting at the far end of the room, his back turned to the door. It was Andrew Parker. The man hadn't aged well. His face was gaunt, his hair long and unkempt, but there was no mistaking him. Harper had found the man who had masterminded the whole operation. "Detective Harper," Andrew said, his voice cold and detached. "I knew you would come for me eventually. It was just a matter of time." Harper stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. "It's over, Andrew. You can't hide from the truth any longer. The people of Willow Creek deserve to know everything." Andrew turned to face Harper, a sly grin spreading across his face. "Do they? Do they really want to know the truth? Because once they do, they'll never be able to go back to the way things were. Everything they thought they knew will crumble." Andrew Parker's words echoed in the dim cabin, his voice almost mocking. Harper wasn't fazed. He had come too far to let Parker's twisted perspective stop him now. "What are you afraid of, Parker?" Harper's voice was steady. "You're the one who's been running from the truth all these years." Andrew's grin faltered slightly, and for a moment, the mask slipped. "Afraid?" He let out a dry laugh. "I'm not afraid, Harper. I'm beyond fear. The people of Willow Creek, they don't understand. They never did. All they see are pretty facades. Families, churches, businesses, but underneath it all, it's rotting. It always has been." Harper's gut twisted as he stepped closer. He could feel the weight of Andrew's words. It wasn't just the murder of Rachel Miller that had driven Harper to this point. It was everything, the manipulations, the control, the people who had been swept under the rug in favor of power and wealth. Andrew stood slowly, a towering figure despite his age. "You think you can stop it, Harper?" He stepped closer, his eyes burning with something cold, something vicious. "The society is bigger than you, bigger than the law. You think exposing me will solve it? It won't. There are others everywhere. We've already won." Harper's voice was calm, determined. "I'm not here to play your game, Parker. I'm here to end it." Andrew laughed again, but this time it was hollow. "You don't get it, do you? This town is my legacy. My mark on the world. You really think you can just take that away?" Harper's response was simple. "I'm not taking anything away. I'm giving this town the chance to breathe again." As Harper and Parker continued their tense exchange, Harper knew that it was time to make his move. He wasn't just there to arrest Parker. He needed to ensure that the people of Willow Creek understood the full extent of the corruption that had taken root in their town. Harper made his way out of the cabin, determined to gather the final pieces of the puzzle. He knew there were others still in the society, still hiding in the shadows, but the arrest of Andrew Parker would set a new tone in Willow Creek. It was the first step in exposing the truth. Harper gathered his team and prepared for one final push. He had already sent word to the authorities in the town, alerting them to the developments. The town's leadership, those still left, would be taken down one by one. As Harper coordinated with local officers, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was on the precipice of something much larger than he could handle. That night, with Parker in custody, Harper sat alone in his office, staring out at the quiet town. It had been weeks since Rachel's murder, and everything had led to this moment. But even as the pieces of the investigation fell into place, Harper couldn't shake the haunting thought that something was still off, still hidden, waiting to strike. He couldn't rest yet. The investigation into Andrew Parker's role in the secret society was just the beginning. As Harper continued to dig deeper, more details surfaced, revealing just how far-reaching the society's influence had been. Parker was not the only one who had been orchestrating the web of deceit. Harper and his team unearthed documents, old photographs, and even financial records showing connections between Parker and other key figures in the town. As they pieced everything together, they realized that the secret society had not only been behind the murders and disappearances over the years, it had also orchestrated the political campaigns, manipulated the local economy, and hidden its tracks with seemingly innocuous events. The shockwaves of these revelations rippled through Willow Creek. People began to realize that their town, the very foundation of their lives, had been built on the blood of their own neighbors. The families who had once been the pillars of Willow Creek's success were the same ones who had been involved in the darkest deeds. Harper couldn't help but feel a sense of victory, but it was bittersweet. The truth was finally coming to light, but at what cost? Willow Creek was a town forever changed, its innocence lost. The town of Willow Creek had seen its fair share of pain, but it was finally beginning to heal. After Andrew Parker's arrest, Harper's team worked tirelessly to uncover the full extent of the secret society's operations. Every connection, every twisted relationship was unraveled. The trials that followed were long and grueling, with Parker's former allies being exposed one by one. Many were convicted, their lives shattered by the truth. Some, like Scott Andrews and Mark Donovan, tried to plead for reduced sentences, but the evidence against them was overwhelming. Lisa Andrews, who had once been so sure of her control over Willow Creek, found herself facing charges that would change her life forever. Despite the victories in the courtroom, Harper couldn't shake the feeling that he had lost something along the way. The people of Willow Creek were no longer the innocent, welcoming townsfolk he had once known. They had been forced to confront the horrors of their past, and no amount of justice could undo the damage that had been done. As for Rachel Miller, her legacy became the driving force behind the town's recovery. The young teacher, who had never asked for fame or recognition, became a symbol of courage in the face of overwhelming odds. Her death, tragic and senseless, was the spark that ignited the truth. And as the years went on, the town slowly began to rebuild, each person carrying the lessons of the past into the future. Harper never forgot Rachel. She had been the key to bringing down the secret society, and he often visited her grave, offering his silent apologies for the things he couldn't prevent. He had helped expose the truth, but the true cost of that truth was something that would haunt him forever. And so Willow Creek moved on. But its past would always linger in the shadows, a reminder that no town is as perfect as it seems, and that the darkest secrets often hide in plain sight. The investigation into Rachel Miller's murder continued to gain momentum as Detective Harper uncovered more connections that linked the town's elite to the crime. But the deeper Harper dug, the more he realized that Rachel was not just a victim of a personal vendetta. Her death was the result of something far more sinister, something that stretched back decades. Harper's focus shifted from just solving the murder to understanding the true nature of Willow Creek's darkness. What had driven this society to protect its secrets at all costs? What had they been hiding for so long? As he unearthed old town records, he found whispers of corruption that had been buried beneath the surface of Willow Creek's idyllic charm. The town's founding families, it seemed, had made pacts with unspeakable forces, both metaphorical and literal, to build their wealth. These families had been linked to criminal enterprises, underhanded deals, and violence against those who got in their way. These weren't just business dealings. This was a system designed to maintain power by any means necessary. Rachel Miller, in her innocence and dedication to the community, had unknowingly stumbled into the heart of this web of deceit. She had been involved with Scott Andrews, Mark Donovan, and others, all of whom were entangled in the complex web of lies. What Rachel didn't know was that her death would serve as the final push to expose the truth that had been buried for generations. As the town of Willow Creek became increasingly aware of the investigation's progress, the facade of the town's elite began to crumble. Those who had once been revered were now revealed to be part of a dangerous network, intent on keeping their control over the town's wealth and resources. Harper's findings uncovered a terrifying pattern. One by one, prominent figures, many of whom were descendants of the town's founders, had been involved in a series of mysterious deaths that had never been properly investigated. These deaths, which spanned decades, had always been explained away as accidents, suicides, or natural causes. But in truth, they were murders designed to silence anyone who threatened to reveal the society's secrets. Harper, with the help of Sylvia Green and other whistleblowers, managed to uncover a series of photographs and documents that linked the dead to the society. It became clear that Rachel's murder was part of a larger plan, one to keep the truth buried forever. The town of Willow Creek was not the peaceful place it had always appeared to be. It was a town built on the backs of the forgotten, the silenced, and the dead. And now, as Harper gathered his evidence, he knew that he was ready to bring down the remaining members of the society. Despite his growing sense of urgency, Harper knew that he had to be careful. The remaining members of the society were well-connected, and they had the resources to fight back. As Harper prepared to confront them, he reached out to the higher authorities, state police, the district attorney's office, and even federal investigators. But he knew that, ultimately, it would be up to him to expose the truth. One final piece of the puzzle fell into place when Harper was handed a disturbing report. A local journalist, who had been covering the case for weeks, had disappeared without a trace. Her last report had detailed suspicious connections between Andrew Parker and a number of wealthy businessmen who had invested heavily in the town's infrastructure. The report also hinted at links between these investors and powerful political figures in the state government. Harper realized that this wasn't just a town-level conspiracy. It was a much larger issue that involved the state's political and business elites. The investigation had already gone so far that it threatened to bring down not just Willow Creek's secret society, but the very foundation of state politics. Harper's resolve only strengthened. It was now or never. If he didn't act quickly, the remaining members of the society might escape justice, as they had done for so many years. On the night of the final confrontation, Detective Harper and his team moved swiftly and silently. Armed with the evidence he had painstakingly gathered, Harper led a group of officers to the estate of the remaining powerful figures who were still members of the secret society. The plan was to arrest them all at once, before they could escape or destroy the evidence. As they stormed the mansion, Harper's heart pounded in his chest. This was the moment he had been working toward for months. And yet, as the doors were kicked open and the officers flooded in, Harper felt a chill run down his spine. There, standing in the grand foyer, were the men and women who had controlled Willow Creek for so long, scowling, but unrepentant. Tommy Hayes, Scott Andrews, and Mark Donovan stood at the front, their faces twisted in a mixture of fear and defiance. Lisa Andrews was among them, her eyes darting nervously as she realized that the walls were finally closing in. "You thought you could destroy everything we've built," Tommy Hayes sneered as Harper approached him. "But you're too late. It's over now. The town belongs to us." Harper's gaze hardened. "Not anymore, Tommy. Your reign is over." The arrest of the remaining members of the society marked the end of an era in Willow Creek. The trials that followed were long and public, with the town watching as its former pillars of power were torn down piece by piece. The evidence was overwhelming, and every member of the secret society was convicted for their role in the corruption, murder, and manipulation of the townspeople. As the trials concluded, the residents of Willow Creek began to rebuild their town, but the damage was done. The town's legacy had been forever tainted by the crimes committed in its name. For some, the pain was too much to bear. The realization that the people they had trusted had been the ones responsible for so much pain and suffering was a bitter pill to swallow. Detective Harper, though satisfied with the justice he had secured, knew that the scars would never truly heal. He had uncovered the truth, but the truth had a cost. Over time, Willow Creek began to heal, though the process was slow and painful. Rachel Miller's legacy lived on, not as a victim, but as a symbol of the strength it took to face the darkness and expose the truth. Her murder had been the catalyst that had torn down the walls of corruption and secrecy, and for that, the town would forever be grateful. Detective Harper continued his work in Willow Creek, but his thoughts often drifted back to Rachel. She had been the key to everything. Without her, the society's grip on the town might have remained hidden for generations. Her death had sparked a revolution of truth and justice. And so, Willow Creek moved forward, no longer a town shackled by its past, but a town determined to rebuild and redefine itself. The residents would never forget what had happened, but they had the power to shape the future. The cycle of corruption had been broken, and for the first time in a long while, the town could breathe easy. The trials of the secret society came to an end, and justice had been served. But the shadows of the past lingered over Willow Creek, a reminder that darkness could be hidden in the most unlikely places. Detective Harper, though scarred by the revelations, found solace in knowing that the truth had been brought to light. Rachel Miller's murder had changed the town forever. And though the town would never be the same, it would be stronger for it. The truth had won. And as Harper left the courthouse on the final day of the trial, he could only wonder what the future held for Willow Creek. A future where secrets could no longer be buried, and where the power of truth would always prevail. As the trials continued, the people of Willow Creek found themselves torn between anger, disbelief, and a profound sense of betrayal. For generations, they had placed their trust in the town's leaders, only to realize that their very foundations were built on lies. The revelations about the secret society sent shockwaves through the town, and the residents, once so tight-knit, began to question everything. There was no one left to turn to for answers. The local businesses that had flourished under the society's protection crumbled, as former patrons withdrew their support. The real estate market, once booming, faltered as fear gripped the town. Everyone knew the corruption had been exposed, but no one knew how long the effects would last. At the courthouse, Harper sat through endless testimonies. The trial of Tommy Hayes had become a media sensation, drawing attention from across the state. Journalists from all over were eager to get a piece of the action, and with every day that passed, more details about the society's operations were uncovered. It seemed like every day brought a new bombshell. Harper had expected some resistance to the truth, but the lengths to which the society's members had gone to maintain their hold on power still shocked him. The death of Rachel Miller had become a symbol of their desperation, and in the end, it was her death that would bring them all down. With the guilty verdicts piling up, the once proud elites of Willow Creek were now reduced to prisoners, awaiting their sentences. But there was one person who still held out hope. Lisa Andrews, whose involvement in the society had been revealed after countless investigations, stood at the center of the media frenzy. But despite all the evidence against her, she remained eerily calm. It was during a private interview with Harper that Lisa revealed a surprising truth. She had known about the society's dark dealings from the start. She had seen the way it controlled the town's economy, the way it manipulated political power, and how it kept people in line through fear and intimidation. But Lisa had convinced herself that it was necessary, that the power structure was too deeply ingrained to change. "I didn't want to be part of it," Lisa confessed. "But when Scott and I were young, we made a pact. We promised that we would protect our family, no matter the cost. We would do whatever it took to keep the power in our hands." Harper had heard similar stories from others in the society, but hearing it from Lisa herself made it all the more real. She wasn't just a pawn in the game. She had chosen to play, and now she had to face the consequences. As the trials neared their end, Harper's sense of urgency only increased. The remaining society members were all behind bars, but there were still loose ends to tie up. Among them was Andrew Parker, the former councilman who had been the mastermind behind much of the society's most insidious actions. But Andrew wasn't just hiding behind bars. He had his own plans. In the dead of night, Harper received an anonymous tip. Someone had seen Andrew Parker slipping out of his cell. The tip led Harper to a location on the outskirts of town, a dilapidated warehouse that had long been abandoned. With his heart racing, Harper arrived at the location and called for backup. The warehouse loomed ahead, shrouded in darkness. Something didn't feel right. As Harper and his team cautiously entered the building, they found traces of recent activity. The faint scent of gasoline lingered in the air. Inside, they discovered something horrifying. The building had been rigged with explosives. It became clear that Andrew Parker had been planning one last act of vengeance, taking the town with him as he went. Harper immediately contacted the bomb squad, but as they worked to disarm the devices, the seconds ticked by, each one filled with the weight of uncertainty. The entire town could have been destroyed in an instant if the devices had gone off. The bomb squad worked feverishly, and after what seemed like an eternity, they managed to disarm the explosives, narrowly averting disaster. But Andrew Parker had escaped. He was now a fugitive, and Harper knew that the hunt for him was only just beginning. With Andrew Parker still on the run, the people of Willow Creek struggled to find peace. Though the trials were over, the sense of unease never quite lifted. Harper, too, felt the weight of the town's history pressing on him. He had exposed the darkest secrets, but he knew that the town's true healing wouldn't come from a courtroom verdict. It would take time and a lot of work to rebuild the trust that had been shattered. Rachel Miller's legacy lived on, not just in her death, but in the town's commitment to moving forward. Harper worked closely with town leaders, guiding them through the difficult process of restoring order and rebuilding the community's fractured sense of unity. He spoke with citizens, offering support and reassurance, but the truth was that nothing would ever be the same. In the months that followed, Willow Creek began to change. The town's economy slowly recovered, and the corrupt businesses that had propped up the secret society were dismantled. But beneath the surface, the scars of the past remained, and for many, it was impossible to forget the damage done by the secret society. Despite the efforts to restore peace, Andrew Parker remained a threat. The search for him continued, but with each passing day, it became more likely that he had fled the country. No one knew where he had gone or if he was still in the country at all. But Harper refused to give up. He couldn't afford to. Parker's crimes were too great, and the town needed closure. The hunt for Andrew Parker consumed Harper's every thought. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months. Every lead seemed to fizzle out, every step forward taking them 2 steps back. The longer Parker remained at large, the more the town's hope began to fade. But just when Harper thought he had reached a dead end, a breakthrough came from an unlikely source, a former associate of Parker's who had grown disillusioned with his actions. The associate provided a tip that led Harper to a remote cabin in the mountains. The cabin had been abandoned for years, but with this new information, Harper believed that they might finally find Parker. With backup on the way, Harper and his team made their way to the cabin. The air was thick with tension as they approached. Every step felt like it could be their last, but Harper wasn't afraid. He had come too far to stop now. Inside the cabin, they found Andrew Parker. He was waiting for them, but there was no fear in his eyes, only a calm acceptance. It was clear that Parker had known this day would come. "I knew you'd find me eventually," he said, his voice cold. "But it doesn't matter. It's too late now. The damage has been done. I've won." Harper stepped forward, his resolve unwavering. "You haven't won, Parker. You're finished." The arrest was swift. There was no escape this time. Andrew Parker, the man who had masterminded the destruction of Willow Creek, was finally taken into custody. With Andrew Parker's capture, the final chapter of the story was written. The town of Willow Creek slowly began to rebuild piece by piece. The scars of the past would never fully disappear, but the town was stronger for having faced its darkest truths. Detective Harper knew that his work in Willow Creek wasn't over. The town needed a leader, someone who could guide them through the difficult process of rebuilding trust and hope. Harper stayed in Willow Creek, helping the town recover and ensuring that the horrors of the past were never repeated. Rachel Miller, whose murder had set everything in motion, remained a symbol of the town's strength. Her legacy lived on not as a victim, but as the catalyst for change. As the months passed, Detective Harper continued his work in Willow Creek, but a deep sense of exhaustion had settled in. The weight of everything, the lives ruined, the betrayals, the lost innocence, hung over him. He had given so much to the investigation and the pursuit of justice, but there were times when even Harper had to confront the personal toll this case had taken on him. In the evenings, after long days spent meeting with survivors, speaking to witnesses, and providing support for the town's recovery, Harper would walk along the streets of Willow Creek. The town felt quieter now, almost somber. The vibrancy that had once filled the air was gone, replaced by a cautious, reluctant optimism. People were trying to rebuild, but it wasn't easy. Rachel Miller's death had cracked open the town's foundation, and it was clear that the town would never be the same. It wasn't just about exposing the society anymore. It was about reclaiming something that had been lost, something that felt irretrievably broken. Every time Harper walked through the town square, he would pass by the memorial for Rachel. It was simple. A small plaque set into the stone of the old fountain, a quiet tribute to the woman who had unintentionally ignited a revolution. Though the memorial was small, it stood as a powerful reminder of the price they had paid for justice. The people of Willow Creek had fought back, and they had won. But the victory had come at a cost that could never be fully measured. Harper had seen the worst of humanity. He had uncovered greed, violence, and manipulation in its most extreme forms. The people he had once trusted, those who had shaped Willow Creek's story, had been behind the corruption and murder. But the more Harper uncovered, the more he realized that the true burden of truth wasn't in the revelations themselves. It was in how you carried them afterward. The people of Willow Creek had been lied to for decades. They had been made to believe that their town was safe, that they were protected by the very people who had been orchestrating the damage. But the truth, when it finally came to light, had left the town divided. There were those who were grateful for Harper's work, but there were also those who felt that the town's image had been tarnished beyond repair. Some wanted to forget the past, to pretend that it never happened. They wanted to move on, to heal, and to restore their lives. Others felt that the truth was essential, no matter how painful it might be. They believed that they had to confront their history in order to truly heal. As Harper spent more time in the town, meeting with its people, he began to see the fractures more clearly. There were those who found redemption in facing the truth, and there were those who struggled with the weight of knowing what had been done. One day, Harper sat with Sylvia Green in the coffee shop where Rachel had spent so many of her afternoons. They had become friends over the course of the investigation, and Sylvia, like so many others, was trying to make sense of the town's new reality. "I never imagined it would come to this," Sylvia said, stirring her coffee slowly. "I thought the past was long buried. We always thought we were safe here." Harper nodded, looking out the window. "It's the illusion of safety that's so dangerous. The moment you start believing that nothing can touch you is the moment you stop seeing the cracks beneath your feet." Sylvia sighed. "But what now? After everything that's been exposed, what's left for us?" "There's always something left," Harper replied softly. "It's just up to us to find it. We have a choice now. What kind of town do we want to be moving forward? What kind of people do we want to be?" Sylvia looked at him, a faint glimmer of hope in her eyes. "Maybe it's time to rebuild. But not just the town, you know? I think we need to rebuild ourselves, too." Harper smiled, his eyes lingering on the people moving through the streets. "That's the hardest part, but it's the only way forward." Months turned into years. Harper remained in Willow Creek, not as a detective chasing after criminals, but as a part of the town's healing process. He worked with the local government to implement reforms, pushing for transparency and accountability at every level. The town was learning how to be open with its wounds, no longer hiding them in the dark. The town's businesses began to thrive again, not because they had returned to the old ways, but because they had embraced a new vision. There was a collective effort to rebuild the community, to bring it back to life in a way that respected both its past and its future. Rachel Miller's memory was honored not just with a plaque, but through the lasting changes she had inspired. Her name became a symbol of courage, of the power of truth to expose the darkness, and the ability to rebuild from the wreckage. The day finally came when Harper felt it was time to leave. He had helped Willow Creek turn a new page, and the town was stronger for it. The people had faced the truth, confronted their past, and chosen to rebuild. But Harper knew that his journey here had reached its end. The work of justice had been done, and now it was up to the people of Willow Creek to keep it going. On his last day in town, Harper stood at the edge of the cemetery where Rachel was buried. The sun had just begun to set, casting a golden light over the graves. He had come full circle, from the chaos of Rachel's murder to the quiet peace that had followed. He had done everything he could, and now it was time for Willow Creek to move forward without him. He whispered a quiet farewell to Rachel, knowing that her legacy would live on long after he was gone. Willow Creek was no longer just a town. It was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and a reminder that truth, no matter how painful, would always find its way to the surface. Harper took one last look at the town that had changed him, then turned and walked away, knowing that he had made a difference. He had helped Willow Creek find redemption, and in doing so, he had found his own.